A quiet after-the-war story about a field, a family, and a boy trying to fill a space too big for him. By June of 1948, the corn had pushed past my shoulders, and I was only 13, which made both things feel wrong in the same way. Pa used to say corn should grow knee-high by the 4th of July. Ours was already brushing my ear in late June, bending the rows into green hallways that swallowed sound. When the wind came, the field spoke in a language I almost understood. Hiss, hush, hold on. Pa wasn't there to hear it. Folks in town still said, "Your father," like it was a door they opened carefully. He'd left in '44 and didn't come back, and we had his box on the mantel to prove it. Inside were dog tags, a ribbon, a photograph of him sitting on a crate smiling like he didn't know the picture would have to last. Ma dusted it on Saturdays. I pretended not to watch. Everyone told me I was the man of the house now, which sounded important until a belt wouldn't thread through a stubborn buckle or the pump coughed air, and I didn't know which valve to tap. Being a man didn't make the iron lighter or the questions fewer. It just meant I carried them out of sight. Ma worked mornings at the diner in town and afternoons in the garden, where beans climbed the strings like they had somewhere to be. She tied her hair with a faded ribbon and smiled at customers who remembered her from before. At night, she mended and kept the books at the kitchen table with a stubby pencil, lips moving as she added. When she got to the line where Pa's handwriting had stopped the previous fall, seed, fuel, cord repairs, she'd rest the pencil and breathe like someone finishing a long hill. Our neighbor, Mr. Halvorson, walked the fence line every few days the way a pastor walks pews. He'd been too old to go to war, too proud to say he minded. He had hands like shovels and a voice with more gravel than road. "Watch your rows," he'd tell me, "and your rows'll watch you." That sounded like preacher talk, but I wrote it in a notebook anyway, the same one where I kept the dates of rain and the size of tracks by the north gate. The field had been Pa's before me, his Pa's before him, and in town the grain elevator man still called it McKay ground. It made me stand taller and also want to duck. I rose before the sun most mornings, ate bread with apple butter, and checked the well. Then I walked the rows with the hoe over my shoulder like a soldier carrying something more useful. Dew soaked my cuffs. Birds stitched and unstitched the sky. When the soil crusted, I broke it. When we'd set up camp, I sent them packing. If a stalk leaned, I set it straight with dirt cupped around its knees the way Pa had shown me once. One lesson stretched over a whole summer. By noon, heat gathered over the field like a thought you couldn't shake. I'd stand at the end of a row and look across the green and think, this is bigger than me. Then I'd start another row. The first trouble came quiet. A patch in the far east section turned pale as a tired face. Leaves curled like fists. The ground there looked drier, though the rest of the field still held last week's rain. I dug down a few inches and the soil crumbled. The pump had failed on that run of pipe, or a joint had come loose underground where I couldn't see. I stood with dirt in my hand and felt smaller than the hole it left. I told Ma at supper. She chewed, nodded. "We'll ask Halvorson to look," she said, and I stared at my plate long enough to see Pa's fork in my hand. "I can try first," I said. So after chores I went back with a spade, following the line of pipe like tracing a vein. The sun had sloped off toward the grove, and the field breathed cooler. I dug until the spade hit metal, and then until the hole showed the joint, caked with mud that shouldn't have been there. I wiped it with my shirt, tightened the coupling, and prayed a small boy's prayer that didn't sound like any I'd heard in church. The next morning the leaves there lifted a little. I told myself it was the wind. Then I told myself it was me. I didn't know which thing to believe, so I believed both and worked harder. Halvorson came by anyway. He squinted into the rows, spat into the dust, and tapped the pipe with his boot. "Good find," he said, like he hadn't expected me to have two eyes and a shovel. "You keep walking the field. It'll tell you what it needs." That night I wrote in the notebook, "East patch, joint loose, tightened, corn lifted." I underlined lifted twice. Sundays were different now. Church at 9, pot roast if Ma had the energy, then letters. We still wrote to nobody. Habit is a way to keep the door from closing. Ma wrote to her sister in Omaha about heat and prices and the preacher's new baby. I wrote to Pa like he was in a far county instead of a far place. I told him the south fence sagged and I'd strung new wire, that the raccoons had figured out the latch again, that the creek ran low but the frogs sang like it was spring anyway. Sometimes I'd write a line and stop because it sounded like a boy asking a man to come home. In July, the corn overtook me. I could no longer see the far end of a row if I stepped into it. The field turned into a maze with a sky instead of a roof. When the wind moved, everything moved, and I felt like a small ship on a green sea with no shore. The sound of it filled my head at night, a shushing that could have been mercy or warning. One evening, lightning stacked up over the west, white sheets torn and retied. We needed the rain, but storms here were like men, some kind, some proud, some that came to take. I sat on the back step and watched the line crawl closer, counted the seconds between flash and rumble like Pa had taught me. Ma brought the wash in early, clothespins still biting the hems. The first drops hit like coins on the porch roof. Then came the sweep of water, sudden as a door opening. I lay awake listening, half glad, half afraid, until the hail started. Not big stones, not like the year-old man Jensen lost a whole roof, but hard enough to make the field flinch. I wanted to run out and stand over every stalk like a shepherd with too many sheep. Morning showed the damage, ragged leaves, a few bent tops, a patch stomped to lace near the lane. I walked the rows, righted what I could, told the rest to try again. Plants are good at trying again. People pretend to be. By mid-July, the talk in town was prices, whether corn would fetch enough to cover seed, whether the elevator would make folks wait for payment like last year. At the diner, Mrs. Lawson said she'd heard Chicago was paying strong, and 3 men at the counter lifted their cups the same way, like hope was coffee, and they'd ordered it on purpose. Ma brought home tips folded small, the way people hide a secret under their tongues. On a Thursday that burned even at breakfast, the tractor coughed twice and died at the headland. I checked the choke, the plugs, the fuel line, the 3 things I knew how to name, and nothing listened. I sat on the wheel and thought about how Pa would pull his cap low, say something about timing, and make it breathe again. Halvorsen found me there. He climbed down, wiped his hands on a rag, and didn't say need help. He just handed me a wrench and pointed. Spark, he said. Air. Gas. In that order. We broke open the housing. He let me do the bolts, even when I turned one the wrong way first. He told me the names of things like he was giving me cousins I hadn't met. When the engine finally caught, I grinned like a fool. He didn't grin back, just nodded toward the rows. Don't waste a good start, he said, which I wrote down that night, too. If you asked me now what the field smelled like then, I'd say green and sweat and iron and something sweet that wasn't sugar. If you asked what I felt like, I'd say a boy in boots a size too large, walking until my toes found the front. At the end of July, a letter came with a government seal, the kind that made Ma stand before opening. It wasn't bad news, just an update about benefits, a form to sign, numbers that didn't add up to a man. Ma smiled anyway, because she was tired of not smiling. I took the letter to the porch, sat with it beside Tom's old glove, and looked out over the corn. It rose taller than the house on the far side, a wall that kept some things out and some things in. I tried to picture the field harvested, stubble and starlings, and the ground showing its bones again. It felt like imagining winter while sweating through summer. That was the night I realized the truth I didn't want. The corn wasn't only growing tall. I was too, and only one of us knew what to do with the height. August came in hot and stayed like a guest who didn't know when to leave. By the first week, the corn had thrown tassels like flags, and the silk on the ears hung pale and shining in the mornings. When the wind moved across the field, it was like seeing a great animal breathe, shoulders rising, shoulders falling. I tried not to think about how much of that breath we were counting on. Ma started keeping a jar for harvest money. Nickels slid down its side and disappeared. Diner's tips, found change, $1 from Mrs. Lawson for a mended hem. Every few nights, she'd shake the jar and smile, the kind of smile that means we'll make it because we have to. I nodded like a man and felt like a boy doing a man's nod. The work changed too. Less hoeing, more walking. Less fixing fences, more listening. I learned to hear the field's small alarms. The soft rasp of a beetle where it shouldn't be. The hush where water ought to whisper. The feathered thump of a pheasant hen breaking from cover. I kept my notebook in a pocket and wrote in it with dirt blunt pencils. Row 12, earworm. Dust tomorrow. South slope thirsty. Open gate, 2 turns. Coons at the sweet corn again. Reinforced latch. It made me feel like I was learning a language that Pa had always been fluent in. One afternoon the sky bruised to the west the way it does before the big ones. Not a hail squall, something slower, heavier. I stacked storm windows against the shed, tied down the fuel drum, and moved the tractor under the lean-to. Halvorson's truck appeared like a sentence already half said. He climbed out, looked up, sniffed. Gully washer, he said. Good if the ground can take it. Bad if it can't. How do you know which it'll be? I asked. He squinted toward the creek. You learn your ground, he said. And sometimes it still surprises you. The rain hit like a curtain dropped from the rafters. The first hour felt holy. The dust hammered down. The tassels rinsed clean. The smell of hot iron cooling. The second hour felt like a bargain turning. Water began to pool where the slope flattened near the lane, and a thin brown river ran along the edge of row 18, tugging at roots like a pickpocket. I pulled on Pa's old rubber coat and waded in with a shovel, cutting a little channel toward the ditch. The water followed, then hesitated, then followed again. By the time the storm's back broke, the field had drunk what it could. The rest lay shining in the low places like mirrors. I could see my face in one and hardly recognize the set of the jaw. The next morning, I walked the rows to count what the storm had taken. Not as much as I feared, more than I wanted. One patch had lodged, stalks tipped and tangled, like a pile of arms after a fall. You can stand some of it back up if you catch it early, and the ground gives you a second chance. I worked till my hands cramped, lifting and firming, telling each plant the same thing in my head. Try again. Please try again. When I finally straightened, I heard it. Faint at first, then clear, a calf bawling up at Halvorson's place. The sound carried that high note animals use when they ask for help without knowing they're asking. I jogged the fence line to the north gate and saw the trouble. His smallest steer had slid into the creek where the bank sloughed, belly deep in mud and water, legs bicycling to no effect. There wasn't time to fetch him. I grabbed 2 fence posts and a length of chain and scrambled down. The calf's eyes rolled white. Easy, I said, though easy had long left. I worked the chain under its chest, looped it to a post, and used the second post as a lever, grunting like Pa and hoping like me. Inch by inch the calf rose, mud sucking like a mouth. When we got it high enough to catch its feet on a root, the animal found something inside itself and lunged. We fell together into the weeds, me laughing from shock and the calf bawling once more from surprise. Halvorson reached me 5 minutes later, breathless, hat in hand. He saw the tracks, the chain, the calf, and then me, brown as a creek and grinning like a fool. You could have been pulled under, he scolded. Maybe, I said, trying not to shake. But it didn't. He looked at me for a long time, and then did something rare, put his palm on the back of my neck. You come tell me next time anyhow, he said. A man can be brave with help. I wrote that down that night, too. The heat returned after the storm as if insulted. The corn grew another inch, and the world shrank to green walls again. When I stepped into the rows, the air went still and close, and sweat ran into my ears until the world sounded far away. I told myself I knew the field well enough now to walk it blind. Then one afternoon, I proved myself wrong. I'd gone in to check the lodged patch again and took a wrong turn at a split where a raccoon trail crossed our path. The rows were straight, but my head wasn't, and 10 minutes became 20. The sun sanded down to a dull coin. A gust came, and every leaf spoke at once. And for the first time all summer, I felt the field size the way a mouse must feel a church. I stopped, listened, tried to hear the highway, the creek, a tractor, anything to tell me direction. Nothing. just the close hiss of my own breath. Pa had a rule for the woods. If you're turned around, sit down. It felt cowardly to squat in dirt while work waited, but pride is a poor compass. I crouched, closed my eyes, and pictured the place from above the way Pa had made me do as a kid. House, grove, lane, field, the way the rows run, the way afternoon wind sets a bias across the tops. When I stood again, I walked at an angle to the rows instead of along them, counting steps. After 200, the light changed a shade bluer, the edge of the grove. I pushed through and came out behind the shed, knees shaking, mouth dry. No one saw me. That somehow made it worse. I washed at the pump and leaned my forehead to the cool iron until the world settled. That evening, Ma noticed the scuffed knees on my pants and the dirt in my hair. "Long day?" she asked, not pressing. "God turned around," I said. The words tasted like failure. She set a plate in front of me and touched my cheek like I was still 7. "Your father got lost in our bean field the first year we were married," she said, smiling. "He sat down and yelled at the sky till the dog found him. Don't tell the ladies at church." I laughed then, real, loosening something in my chest I'd tightened too long. We ate in a companionable quiet that didn't feel like absence. Harvest talk grew louder as August leaned toward September. Halvorsen inspected his old picker and shook his head so hard his hat nearly fell. He knew a man who might rent us a newer one, if the price was right and luck even righter. Fuel would be dear. Labor would be dearer. Everyone wanted help and no one had it to spare. In town, a flyer went up at the elevator. Silos buying early, moisture dockage applies. Numbers, numbers, numbers. I stared at them like they might turn into answers. Mr. Lyle behind the counter told me moisture was money if you guessed wrong. Cut too soon, you pay? Cut too late, the shucks cut you. I nodded and pretended my stomach wasn't a fist. The night before school started back, Ma hemmed my only good pants while I sanded splinters from the porch rail. The air smelled of cut grass and hot tin. After a while she said, "You don't have to be your father." I didn't look up. "Who else is there to be?" "Ben," she said simply. "You. The boy who fixed a pipe and saved Halvorsen's calf and sat down when the rows lied to him. Your father would have liked that boy." The porch light made a small circle around us. Beyond it the field stood tall and dark, a choir of quiet throats. I went to bed with the window open and the night pressing cool on my arms. Somewhere a barn owl took inventory of the mice. Somewhere a truck downshifted on the highway. Somewhere a future harvest waited for the first cut. I dreamed I was walking between rows that kept growing higher, the leaves closing like hands over my head, until I reached a clearing where Pa stood with a wrench and a smile, and he said, "Start where you are." When I woke, it was still dark and I felt less alone. 2 mornings later, Halvorsen rolled into our yard with news. The neighbor 2 sections over would rent us his picker after he finished his East 80. If we can help him finish by Saturday. That meant days that begin before light and end after it. It meant blistered palms and a lunch pail that emptied too soon. It meant help given before help received, which is the only kind that counts. We said yes before he finished asking. Ma packed sandwiches wrapped in wax paper and 2 thermoses that clinked like fellowship. I climbed into Halvorsen's truck feeling older than the road. The neighbor's field was a sea. Men moved like small boats on it, steady, stubborn. I learned the machine's temper, the way it wanted its corn fed just so, the rattle that meant careful and the scrape that meant now. We worked until our shadows stretched as long as truths, and then longer. When at last the neighbor clapped Halvorsen on the back and said the words we'd come for, "She's yours come sunup Sunday," I felt a tired so clean it almost shone. That night, lying in bed with my hands throbbing and my head full of engine hum, I understood something simple. Tomorrow we would start cutting what we had grown. The field would become piles. The piles would become loads. The loads would become numbers. The numbers would become what we had to live on. It was too large for a boy and exactly the size of the boy I was trying to be. I turned on my side, looked out at stars snagged in the cottonwoods, and whispered into the warm dark, not quite a prayer and not quite a promise. Start where you are. A quiet harvest. A boy who became himself. The picker came at dawn, still smelling like someone else's field. Halvorsen backed it off the trailer like he was unwrapping something expensive. I watched from the porch with my boots half-laced, and the air still silver from morning. Behind me, Mom moved in the kitchen, packing sandwiches, folding a note I'd find at lunch that said, "Proud of you, Mom." The corn stood tall and ready. The ears were full, husks tight, silk brown just right. All summer had led here. We fueled up and walked the rows one last time before machines took over. The field felt like a friend you're saying goodbye to, still, full of things you'll remember later but won't know how to describe. The first pass down row one was louder than I expected. The picker growled and snapped and swallowed. Stalks shuddered, ears vanished, cobs clattered into the bin. The smell of broken green filled the air, and I felt both proud and sorry for it. By mid-morning, sweat ran from my collar to my belt. The field changed behind us. Neat rows became stubble. The view opened. Where walls of corn had stood yesterday, now lay wind and space. Halvorsen showed me how to steer the turns without nicking corners. He let me drive the straight rows alone. My hands learned the wheel. My ears learned the engine. When it coughed, I fed it slower. When it pulled, I let it. The days blurred. Cut, load, haul, repeat. Ma waved from the porch when we passed the house. Hair in a scarf, apron streaked with flour and sweat. Some nights I came in too tired to chew. I'd sit at the table and watch her hands fold laundry with quiet rhythm, and we wouldn't need words. The last day came sooner than expected. We turned into the final block of rows, and the sun hit just right, casting long shadows across golden stubble. I looked out and realized I could see the grove from anywhere now. The corn that had towered above me all summer was gone. In its place, space, light, a wider horizon. I shut off the engine at the end of the last row. The silence rang. I stepped down and stood there, boots in dust, heart louder than the machine. Halvorsen came up beside me, chewing a toothpick. "Well," he said, "there's your first one." I nodded. "Yeah." He slapped my shoulder. "It'll never feel quite like this again." "What do you mean?" "Firsts never do." That evening, I walked the edge of the field alone. Starlings darted between fence posts. The earth still smelled warm, even with the sun gone. In the clearing near the pump, I sat on a low rock and looked out over the emptiness. And I smiled, because for the first time all season, the field didn't feel bigger than me. It felt just right. Later, Ma found me on the porch, my notebook on my lap. "Writing?" she asked. I nodded. "I think I know what to put." She looked toward the field and back at me. "Want me to read it when it's done?" "Yeah," I said. "I think Pa would have liked it too." She placed her hand on my hair and left it there a moment longer than usual. That year, the corn grew too tall. But so did I. And I didn't shrink when the harvest came. End.